Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for attending this Zoom event, and thanks for your interest in a very important topic, the impact of COVID-19 on education in Eden Prairie. I'm Mark Weber, Executive Director of the Eden Prairie Community Foundation. We're an organization, a nonprofit that's almost 40 years old, that's focused on making Eden Prairie better. And a lot of times that manifests itself in raising money and giving grants to nonprofits that are helping residents with hardship or other difficulties. And so over the last 5 years, we've generated about $1 million in philanthropy in Eden Prairie. And part of our role is raising awareness of important local issues. And it's really that role that we're holding this event and some others like it this fall. And we'll continue those public Zoom newsmaker events throughout the winter and into next spring. So welcome. We hope it's informative to you. And on behalf of the foundation, we're really glad to have you here this evening. So this is limited to 1 hour, and we're asking all of our attendees to remain on mute to lessen the background distractions and interruptions. And for the same reason, we're going to remain on speaker view instead of gallery view and turn folks' videos off as well. This is really designed to be a chat between me and our guest this evening, so we can get at the heart of the discussion, which is really how this global pandemic has affected us locally in the schools. You're invited to type some questions into the chat function on Zoom, and I'll try to get to as many of those as time allows. There were a number of questions submitted during the registration process. Great questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can as well. The speaker series that we're holding this fall is sponsored in part by two of the foundation's partners, Flagship Bank and Eden Corporation. And so we really thank them for their support. Our guest today is Dr. Josh Swanson. Josh has been a leader in the Eden Prairie Schools since 2012 and has served as superintendent since August 2017. He's a Minnesota native who worked in the private sector upon graduating from college, but gravitated towards education, starting with teaching and coaching, and then eventually administration. He's been on the cutting edge of changes in technology, and curriculum, and facilities here for the Eden Prairie Schools. In addition, Josh and his family reside in Eden Prairie, and I know Josh is active in giving back to the community through Chamber of Commerce, Eden Prairie AM Rotary, and other organizations. So welcome, Josh, and let's begin.
Yeah, thanks for having me this evening, and I appreciate the invite to be a part of the conversation tonight.
So breaking news, the vaccine is on the way. Yay. But of course, here we are, we're mired in some of the same issues that have bedeviled us really since last mid-March and are expected to continue here for certainly a number of weeks, if not months, and that's going to be the heart of our discussion tonight. Before we get into some of the details on how COVID has affected the Eden Prairie Schools, I'm wondering if you could come up with a couple of words that describe what it's been like for you to lead a large suburban public school district during a global pandemic.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think probably three things, you know, kind of come to mind right off the cusp, and that would be, I think, challenging and probably inspiring in some ways, and then surprising as well. And I think that's been really true for our staff and students and families as well. Those have been some themes. There there have been some tough things that have taken place through all this. You know, we've honestly, we've learned a huge amount. I mean, learned a great deal. And you think about how adept we all are right now at jumping onto Zoom and connecting this way. That's a big difference, because it's changed all of our routines, like, and how we're doing things. And so we've had to overcome, you know, a lot of obstacles as a community. And, you know, that's been the case for all of us as we've gone through that. And it's required us to think a little differently about how we're going about business on a daily basis. And so, you know, as I've worked with folks across the district, you know, we've been really working hard to think strategically, but then really act thoughtfully in all kinds of ways. And, you know, our guiding force, our guiding point has just been our mission. I mean, when we think about inspiring each of our students every day, that's what I keep asking staff to look at and to think about as we work in that design. And, you know, I've seen our staff step up in just amazing ways and in really creative ways, and our students as well. I actually met with a group of our students at CMS on Tuesday, and I met with a group of our high school students today. And they're helping constantly think about and shape and form, you know, how we're doing business, because I want to hear directly from them what that's looking like. And so we've been trying to listen, you know, an awful lot, and learn and hear, so that we can just work in partnership. And I think, you know, as we do that, and we work through some of those hardships. I mean, you know, it hasn't been easy all the time. For lots of people. And I've heard that from a lot of people. You know, I've heard difficulties from families and from students and from staff, you know, as we've all kind of navigated this. And, you know, so I think, you know, it's in those moments, it's one of those, that's where our care for each other, you know, and having a lot of patience and providing some grace in those times, those are the things that really bind us in partnership as a community, you know, in a lot of ways. This is just such a human endeavor. And, you know, although this isn't the way any of us would want this, we're all going through this human experience together too. And I think the only way we get through that is in partnership. And so, you know, through this too, you know, as I just reflect on your initial question of what are those few words, you know, and I go back to that, you know, challenging and, you know, inspiring and surprising. You know, we've learned some stuff out of this too. So, you know, there's a lot of things that when we get back, and we will get back, I mean, we will. And, you know, it might not be total normal, if you will. It might be a renormalized normal. But, you know, as we get back to that, you know, I think we're going to be able to do some things differently. Some things we're going to go back to kind of the way we did it before. But I think, you know, we're going to go back and do some things better and do some different things as well that we've learned through this time, because we've learned some things that have really worked quite well. We've done some things that haven't too, you know, we correct those continuously, but you know, I've been so grateful all the way along, you know, for our staff who's really passionate and, you know, trying to do the right thing for kids on a daily basis. You know, we have such engaged families who have been wonderful partners through this. You know, our supportive community, and it's been a supportive community long before the pandemic. I mean, you know, we were in such a good position relatively as we went into a pandemic because of the support from the community. You know, we've had a technology levy in place. We had a lot of tools that we had at our disposal to be able to use. And so, you know, I'm just so appreciative and thankful of the support from the community as we've gone through this to help us with lots of different points. Because we've really been pretty well set up to be able to navigate this. And I know we'll come out better on the backside. So, you know, we'll just, in the meantime, we're going to continue to kind of keep focusing, you know, continuously on care for people and really our mission to inspire each student. That means helping students learn on a daily basis too. So, yeah, inspiring, challenging, and really surprising at times as well.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this changes us and our world in any kind of permanent way, how that mark is left on us.
You know, we've increased our flexibility so much in this time, and it's allowed us in some ways to meet family needs, you know, in better ways sometimes too, because all of a sudden our time and space, you know, is broken down in new ways. So I think that will be, you know, if there's something that comes out with a real silver lining, that will be one of those things, is it changes the way we're using some of our time. And I think it knocks down some of the barriers we have around time and space as well.
So speaking of flexibility, in November, when Minnesota COVID cases started to really surge, you shifted to distance learning only. And now my understanding is that a decision might be forthcoming as to whether or not to extend that beyond January 4th. Um, is that correct? And what kind of
Yeah.
factors will go into your decision, or has the decision already been made?
No, the decision hasn't been made. And there's not a set date for that announcement. But I will say, we've worked really closely and in partnership with our Department of Health, the county public health folks, with the Department of Education. I have a local incident command team that we meet with, and we're going to be meeting both this week and over next week to do that. And I know how important it is to provide our families and our students and our staff with adequate time to be able to make any kind of adjustments before we do things. Switching models is hard on everybody. And so, back in August, I actually laid out, a framework of some of the things that I wanted to see have happen if we did have to make a transition. And one of the things I wanted to be able to do was do things in a really thoughtful and purposeful way, and do it in a way that provided adequate time for people to make those adjustments, because it disrupts routines, it disrupts childcare, it disrupts work arrangements, it disrupts instructional design, it disrupts mental models for people. I mean, there's all kinds of things that those shifts disrupt. So we have meetings scheduled here this week and next to meet with those public health officials, hear from the public health experts, our epidemiologists. We'll be meeting with our local incident command team and really looking at our local data as well to make sure that whatever that next decision is, that both logistically we can carry it out, we can do it in a healthy and safe way for our students and our staff, because that's so incredibly important too. And, I listened to really kind of careful consultation with all of those folks. And we really look at making a holistic decision. So there isn't one single factor. It's going to be, can we staff buildings effectively? Can we keep a safe and healthy environment? And can we create and maintain a stable environment? Because there isn't anything worse than, switching models and then having to switch back immediately again. And I want to make sure that we give our families and our staff adequate notice to be able to both make those changes to routines and make sure that we're planful, so that when we do make that transition, we're really successful. So our tentative date is still set as January 4th, but we'll be looking carefully and monitoring everything as we go along, and then making a decision to get kids back as soon as we can do that in a healthy and safe way. And I will tell you, that's one of my top priorities. I want our kids back. Nobody wants our kids back in school more than I do. And so we'll do that as soon as we can do that.
So will that decision be based on hard data? And can you give me an idea of what some of that data or criteria will be?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things. There isn't one, main driver, but we'll be looking at case rates. We'll be looking at localized, transmission. Our staff and students live not only here in the city of Eden Prairie, but they live in surrounding communities as well. We'll be looking at our ability to staff. We'll be looking at current cases, both inside of staff and students, and quarantines, and all of those kinds of pieces. We'll also be looking at, the data that we have that would predict where those data sets are going. And, of course, that's not perfect data, but certainly as we had to make that transition to distance learning, that data was also very helpful to kind of show us where those trends are going in terms of our case rates in the state.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about how staffing is going?
Yeah, so we're in good shape right now in terms of staffing, but I will also say that prior to us needing to switch, that was one of the drivers that we had. And we weren't seeing any transmission. We still have zero evidence of transmission that's actually occurred inside of our schools, but it is transmitting in our community. And we have people that are ending up in quarantine because they've been in close contact with somebody that's positive. So, when we have a teacher or a bus driver or, another staff member who's, critical to our operations, who might not even, be positive in terms of the virus, but then they end up in quarantine because they had close contact with somebody, even if it wasn't inside the school district, where we have, layers upon layers of mitigation strategies. And so, it's one of the reasons I think we were really successful in not seeing transmission occurring inside of the schools, but it is transmitting inside of our community. And so that impacts us when, we don't have, staff who can come to work, and then that limits our ability to be able to maintain a safe and healthy environment. And so it's not just one of those factors, but all of those things that build together to make sure that we can, successfully run during this pandemic.
And so how will that decision relate to winter sports and other activities, outside the classroom?
Yeah. So, we're members of the Minnesota State High School League. That's the organization that drives that. There's a board of directors that guide decisions and models there. And then, we're a part of a conference. So we're not an isolated individual here. We work with inside of a collective of different school districts and people. And so the State High School League actually met following the governor's executive order to push pause on youth activities and youth sports. And so that board of directors has actually created multiple models for potential schedules for sports that could be implemented after that December 18th time period that the executive order runs through, which pauses all of those activities and athletics for high school students that are guided under that Minnesota State High School League. And one of the things that we can do with athletics and activities is we can start and stop those pretty quickly. So, it's unlike school where, it doesn't necessarily disrupt the same kind of lives. And we know how important that is for kids and everybody too. And, so we'll be making decisions about that. And that we can make decisions about that are separate necessarily from just the school pieces, A, because of our partners, and B, because it's a different implementation and adjustment kind of period that we need. So when that executive order lifts, if and when that lifts, or if there's adjustments to it, the State High School League is in a good position, and they have multiple models that they could roll out for start dates and end dates, adjusted start and end dates for winter activities. And so, practices could start as early as I think December 21st or so is the first start date. It's right after that, December 18th. And then different activities and athletics are staggered in terms of their start, and then they're staggered in terms of their stop. And so there could be activities that start up in their current models they've proposed that would be as early as like December 21st. And I think it plays out all the way till like a January 25th start date for winter activities, something in that range. And there are a couple of different models. And then that takes our winter seasons out through the beginning of or middle of March till kind of the first week of April. And then in those models, there's a little overlap start for the spring activities. So they kind of try to redivide the weeks and the seasons to make that all go. And, we'll also be looking at that, in an individual basis as we go along. Some activities in athletics might be able to run and do so really safely, and others that might not be the case. And so we'll be looking at that and the draft models and making some decisions after we see that guidance come out from the State High School League, and have conversations with our conference partners.
Okay. Well, now I'm beginning to wonder why the word adjustments wasn't in your group of 2 or 3 descriptive words, because that sounds like a lot of adjustments right there.
I think that falls under challenging and surprising.
Okay.
I think it falls under those two, because we had a number of those happen throughout the time.
Sure. So let's go back a little bit to when you did have some in-person classroom learning going on. What types of things did you learn about safety and precautions that might come into play when you're back to that format?
Yeah. It's for me, I care so much about our staff and our students. That health and safety piece was just a top priority all the way through this for our whole team, of administrators and folks who are practicing, and for our staff too, as they were thinking about, how do they keep our students safe, and how do they keep our families safe, and how do we keep each other safe during this time. And so, that care was really at the top of everything. And the thing that we found, and I think was modeled out well, but then I think our staff did just an exceptional job of implementing a layered approach. So it's not just one thing that's going to keep an environment safe and healthy during this time. It's those layers of different things that were being done, where one might fail, but the next one creates that fail safe, if you will. And so, each of those kind of safety procedures, I think, was important. From the fact that we had staff who were out monitoring temperatures. Monitoring temperatures is not perfect on its own, but you catch some things when you're monitoring temperatures. Face coverings, certainly not an end all be all, but when we have face coverings in place, that significantly mitigates transmission. Social distancing practices, our staff were so diligent at, both teaching and very intentionally teaching, and then reminding and monitoring. And it got to the point where it was funny. I got to be out and visit schools a bunch still and be around. I'd watch our students correcting things, because they were so good at it and adept at watching that social distancing. And I can't say enough about like how responsible and like thoughtful and kind our students were as they were thinking about those spaces to keep them safe and healthy. I watched at the high school, like, kids self-organizing as they're in the cafeteria space and making sure they're seating and spacing as they're going down halls. I mean, it really was pretty darn impressive of how responsible our students were. And that's attributed to our staff doing a great job of making sure to really train and teach. Hand washing, we increased access, and we had all kinds of hand sanitizer that was all over the place. And we had people that were making reminders around those things just to do that as well. We also had our staff all monitoring on a daily basis their own health and reporting, so that we could work with staff if there were any kind of health pieces there too. And so it's working with all those different layers that I think really helped us mitigate that spread and reduce transmission to the point that we weren't seeing that. And so, those safety procedures, really, we have tons of evidence that worked really well. And sometimes those simplest things have the biggest impact. And I think it's the being conscious of that and helping remind each other, we're a community. And, when we work in partnership and we help each other out, it goes a long ways in terms of doing that. One of the things that we had happen early on is, normally, and we've done this for a long time to make sure that we've got kind of health and safety pieces in place around, especially around times when, the cold is being transmitted and it's flu season. And so that isn't necessarily new to us, but it would always be that we could get the supplies we needed, where we didn't have to have them all stocked up. We could have things just kind of come as we needed them. Last March really changed that ball game in terms of being able to get access to things. And so that's one of those things that we've learned and shifted. We now have quite a bit of stock on hand, and we know we're not going to be in kind of supply shortage. And we've really set that up in a really, really good way. And then, we've continued to really look at, our airflow in our systems too. We already were meeting some really high standards around air transmission and air filtering, all those kinds of things, but we really have doubled down and looked at that carefully as well. So, again, there's no magic bullet here. It's lots of little things that, are done well, done consistently, and that we're all helping each other with, that I think are making the big difference.
Well, precautions and supplies cost money. I'm curious about whether you're getting financial help from the state and federal governments, and to what extent.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we received about $3.4 million in CARES Act funding that we're helping with all of the various COVID related expenses. And so, a lot of most of that money was spent on new costs. I mean, it was really, so it wasn't an influx of money to the district. It was just directly helping us navigate some of those things that we normally wouldn't have navigated. And, that's gone for some additional staffing that's been required just because of having to implement different models and in different ways. That's changed things. We've had quite a significant investment into, cleaning supplies and equipment and hand washing things and sanitizing stations. We've had additional technology purchases that were necessary to make all this work. There's been some additional curriculum pieces and tools that have been used for, students that, are at risk or that we need to do in a more asynchronous way to meet needs. There's been some adjustments to furniture and spaces and things like that. So, if you look at, our cafeteria behind me here, we redid a whole bunch of tables to be able to make sure that we could create, socially distanced lunch spaces that wasn't the design of how you get the most kids into a cafeteria, and it wasn't the design of there before. So we needed to change a bunch of those different things over. And we've also had, some differences and increases in cost in food and services that we've been providing. And our nutrition services staff have done an amazing job. I mean, they turned on a dime last spring to serve thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of meals out into the community to make sure that that people were taken care of, and have continued to do that in both creating pickup places and going out and doing deliveries. Our transportation department works directly hand in hand with them too, to make sure that, any child here in Eden Prairie, we can get food for them. And it's one of the things that, I want people to know too. There is absolutely zero reason any kid in Eden Prairie should go hungry. We can help with that. I mean, and please, for those people watching, if you need something for kids, get a hold of us. We are happy to help. We actually have an I need button on our website too, that's under our community resources, and we can help with other things too. So if your family needs something, please, submit that. We have a wonderful coordinator or director who helps with that, and we can get connected to resources in the city, whether we can provide the service or one of our partners, our nonprofit partners, can help provide that service so we can get kids and families taken care of. So, so that's kind of where we're at right now. We have some other pieces where, we'll have some other, I think, liability around some employment costs and unemployment costs and things like that we'll navigate as well, that will be part of the kind of the COVID story.
Yeah, I think that was actually my next question. You said 3.4 million in CARES funding.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that covers everything you're doing, or you're having to expend some other funds. It sounds like you're having to expend some other funds.
Yeah, we've seen some challenges inside specifically some of our funds as we look at, we're providing tier 1 childcare. That's hit some of our community education budgets, and that's a significant expense where there isn't the normal revenue that we have in that space. Our food service budgets are being impacted. Transportation budgets are being impacted. So we're going to see some residual of some of these pieces. And, we're coming into the biennium funding year at the legislature. And we also know that, the state budgets are not necessarily in great shape either. So, we're gonna see that come work through the system here for a little while in terms of that impact.
So there's a little uncertainty about some funding yet to come, obviously.
Yep, there is, and we'll watch that really quickly, or watch that really carefully. There's a February forecast that will help us provide us at least with some better updates, I think, around where the state's at. And then as we go through the process legislatively, we'll see how things unfold there too.
Okay. Well, kudos, especially on the food program. I know enough about that to be dangerous, but the effort has been stupendous. And so congratulations on that.
Yeah, our staff deserve a lot of credit.
Yeah. So we did ask people who registered for this event to submit some questions at that time. And people can chime in on chat now. If you have a question, you can use the chat function. A lot of the early topics had to do with help for struggling students and those types of things. So let's start off on some of those topics. I want to ask about attendance, for example,
Yeah.
and what kind of trend you're seeing on attendance, student attendance.
Yeah. So your timing is great because I just actually received reports on kind of where we're at with our attendance. And what we're doing is looking back to last year. So we're looking back at quarter 1 of last year, and we're looking at quarter 1 of this year in terms of our attendance rates. And this year in quarter 1 with our attendance, we've been our staff been doing a great job of both synchronous and asynchronous. And so, kids, even when they're at home, are still logging in and, they're attending classes. And so we've got a great method to take attendance now compared to even where we were at last March. So this is the wonderful news is in quarter 1, our attendance for quarter 1 this year was at 96%. Our attendance for last year during quarter 1, when we were in our regular brick and mortar setting, was 95.3%. We actually have better attendance right now than we had last year at this time after quarter 1. And I will also say, a mid 90s, upper 90s attendance rate in schools is absolutely outstanding. And, I think that just says a ton about the relationships that our staff develop with kids, that kids are engaged. It says a lot about all of our families who, education is important to our parents and to our kids. And it says a lot to our staff too, who, when they are noticing something that's with attendance, that's kind of chronic attendance where they're seeing multiple absences and things, they're doing a ton of outreach and really actively connecting with families and kids and trying to get to what's that root cause? What are the things that we need to do to make sure this is engaging and our kids want to be here and they have meaningful relationships and they get to connect with other students and there's strong purpose to what they're doing too. And so, our staff and our specifically our MTSS teams have worked really hard in that space. And, it's been one of those things that I think has helped us really significantly, both for attendance, but then for grades as well, and for academic outcomes when we notice very early and we are intervening quickly and intervening in a way that's caring and that's trying to meet our students' needs right where they're at in whatever format that needs to be, because it's about meeting the students' needs, not our needs. And so we're trying to figure out what are the things that we have to do on a personalized one-on-one by each student and their circumstances. What are the things that need to happen to be able to help our students achieve and be successful, be engaged and participate and make sure that they're learning continuously.
Well, that's a good attendance number. Is it fairly uniform up and down the grade levels?
It is. And like every year we see, variance, over time, depending on what's going on, but we see extremely high attendance at our high school, middle school, elementaries across the board.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about grading and whether you're seeing any trends in grading, because I think any of us who have been parents know that there are kids that benefit from a classroom structure, and there are kids who are perfectly fine working on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm guessing that one group is probably struggling more with this format than the other.
Yeah, it's today actually the topic, I have our students actually drive the topics when I meet with my advisory groups. So it's not about what I need, it's about what they need. And so when I met with them back in end of September, October, we talked about what are the future topics. And one of the things they want to talk about was asynchronous versus synchronous learning experiences. This was them driving this, not me. But they wanted to talk about what that looked like. And so we had almost an hour-long dialogue today with high school students. And it was amazing because at the end of that hour-long conversation, one of I asked them all to think about what's the one takeaway. And I couldn't believe how many kids actually came back with, you know what, the takeaway from this is it needs to be a little different for everybody. Like some of us really thrive this way. Some of us want this. It's not a one size fits all. And, you know, and I think that really is truthful. And so I think as we've entered this, we've learned a lot in this space. You know, our principals have been working with teachers to really keep an eye on student performance and honestly make sure that we're catching things in the data with students or seeing patterns with students really early, so that, you know, before a student really is falling way behind, we're trying to figure out, okay, what do we have to do to make sure that we can support that student in whatever way that is. And so, you know, we have teams that last spring, we actually increased significantly the cadence at which they were actually monitoring that data and then being able to intervene or interject or connect with kids. And, you know, we were doing that before the pandemic, but we were doing it at a much slower cadence. And with this, we've increased that. And that's one of those things that I honestly think we'll never go back to the other way of doing things, because we've been so successful in a whole bunch of different spots. And so you're absolutely right. It's more difficult to work in a virtual environment for some people, and some people are thriving with it. You know, it's, you know, you don't have that presence of staff and friends and the same daily routine that you normally will. And so, you know, it's figuring out how do we build those routines in ways that will help. And so, you know, with that really frequent monitoring, we've seen some really good outcomes, and our staff deserve a ton of credit with that. So last year, and this would be one of the spots where maybe I should have had that graphic, Mark, but it is out on our website. It's on the Facebook page. It's on a whole bunch of different spots. But, you know, over the last few years, we've had a really nice steady uptick in graduation rates. And, you know, last year, because of the pandemic and where it all fell, I mean, that was really in jeopardy with a lot of things. And so our high school staff, I mean, they worked really, really hard with individual kids to make sure that kids could demonstrate the knowledge and skills to be able to actually get those credit-bearing grades and to get to graduation. And we saw our graduation rate trend continue. I mean, we've been on this upward trend because of our practices, but I think we were able to even accelerate it in some ways last year, and I think we'll be able to keep that up. You know, last year, when the rest of the state, you know, shut down some of the standardized testing, we continued with our localized pieces, not because we were trying to, you know, figure out how everybody was doing, but we wanted to know what are the places where we need to continue to intervene. And what we were able to identify is we actually saw some really normal growth out of most of our students. We also saw some spots where we were like, okay, we need to shore this up. It was one of the reasons we made some decisions about kindergarten and first grade this year and the way that model was implemented after we saw what happened last year. And, you know, I go back to, you know, that continuous monitoring and adjusting and intervening. And we know that the most important person is often that teacher who's doing that. It's the caring teacher who's got a relationship and connection with the kid. But we have lots of other wraparound people as well. You know, we've hired some additional staff to follow up with kids, to provide some additional supports, whether it's at the elementary or middle school level, when there are students who need some supports. And as a result of all that work, a lot like our attendance, after we saw our quarter 1 grades come out from our high school students and middle school students, we saw just over 98% of our grades were credit bearing for our kids after quarter 1 because of that intervention model that's in place. And that's of all grades. And that is almost identical to what our numbers look like in first quarter last year as well. So, you know, we're seeing some really good outcomes and results because of that very intentional work.
So you're not really seeing a slippage in grades. Okay.
We're not in the overall scheme of things. And I will tell you, there were some additional incompletes, and staff, because of that monitoring system, went right after it. And we actually were able to get a lot of the incompletes that normally we wouldn't be able to close down. We actually had a lot higher closure rate of those incompletes because of the flexibility in schedule and that very intentional one-on-one personalized connection and approach to working with kids. And I think, again, that's one of those things that I said at the beginning, there's some things that we've learned through this process that we'll never go back to the way we did it before. That's one of those things that, I think we've seen some very real results in working that way. And I think we'll continue in the future.
So Josh, you mentioned testing before, and I want to make sure I understand what you said about testing. I don't know if you were referring to standardized MCA tests. I know there was a federal reprieve last year when the end of the year was interrupted by the pandemic. And folks keep saying, well, there's unlikely to be a reprieve this second year and the testing will have to take place, but it's hard to envision that if you're doing remote learning. Are you saying that you did the testing anyway last year?
So we didn't do MCA testing last year was canceled, but the MCA test is one standardized assessment that we use.
Okay.
We have, that's our official state assessment. We use localized assessments as well that are standardized and are benchmarked and that actually are much better predictors of growth over time than what the MCA is, just because of the design of the assessment. The MCA was really designed around measuring a proficiency mark. Other assessments are really more designed around measuring growth in students and also correlate to that kind of proficiency scale as well. And so, we did continue to go ahead and assess last year in our kindergarten through 6th grade with those localized assessments. Again, for the purpose of wanting to know, what are the things that we might need to do to shore up any gaps or things that, were in place. And, what we saw in that, that assessment data is our 2nd through 6th grade students really overwhelmingly made what would be expected learning growth over the course of the spring. We're really fortunate this year. We were able to keep our our students, K-12 in that hybrid or in-person model for the first third of the school year. We're 3 months in. And so, we had the ability to really create some really strong relationships between teachers and students already. We've done a lot in order to be able to really build out the learning skills for that distance learning environment. And so, I really believe our staff are focused on those standards. They're focused on the outcomes we want for kids, and they're going to keep their eye on those academic outcomes for kids the entire way along, while making sure we still are doing it in a really caring way. And so, it hasn't been perfect, and it won't be, and we know that every single student has different experiences, and we're working really hard to do that. But I do believe, based on what we're seeing, that our kids are still growing and they're still learning because of that focus and intentionality by our staff. So we don't get to control what happens with the MCAs. The call that I had about a week ago or a week and a half ago with the Department of Education, because that's certainly been a question from them as well, is that to them as well, is right now they are preparing to administer the MCAs. They can't tell us exactly what that will look like or how that will look. They also have told us that they are waiting to hear from the federal Department of Education, because as we all know, there's changes and transitions and all kinds of things happening there too. So we just plain don't know what's going to happen with those MCAs. But I do truly believe our staff are working really hard so that if we get to that point and the MCAs are administered, we'll figure out how to do it logistically. We're really good at that. And I believe our kids will be in a really good spot to be able to do well in those assessments. On top of that, we still are completely committed to administering those local assessments. We did that again this fall. We'll do that again this winter. For our elementary. We'll do it again in the spring so that we can know where students are. And then we're assessing all the way along our students, our staff are inside of classrooms. with formative assessments that are helping our staff adjust for their instruction and adjust where they're at so they know where their students are at. And when we do have students that might need some additional supports or that are identified where we want to, beef some things up to help kids and make sure we're reaching each student, we're also actively doing progress monitoring. So we're continuing to assess continuously along the way with those standards on a one by one each student to know where they're at, to make sure that we're adjusting our practices as adults to meet the needs of our students where they're at. And so, I really do think we'll be in a pretty good spot as we go into that, whatever happens at the federal and state level with those assessments.
And are you pretty confident you can do your testing, even though you might be in a distance learning format?
Yep. Yeah, we did that last, we were able to do that assessment last spring.
Okay.
It was our first time doing it. So there were some hiccups and we learned through that process. We'll be better at that as we go along. And I certainly am hopeful that we'll have students back in school where we can do things that way as well. And, there were lots of questions about assessments when we were when we moved to this, trying to do this remotely and in different ways. And there were questions about, well, will this be valid? And will the information, be useful? And overwhelmingly, our data really, really lined up both with what we would predict and what we would have seen in other circumstances.
So we've talked a lot about the impact on students. An attendee reminds me that we should talk a little bit about teachers. I got the impression from you that a lot of the burden is on the teacher in these extraordinary circumstances to make sure their students are learning and staying on track and things like that. What's being done to avoid teacher burnout?
Yeah, so it is. I will be the first to admit it's just a challenging time for everybody right now. It's been a challenging time for a lot of our parents. It's been challenging time for a lot of families. It's been a challenging time for a lot of people in other professions, and certainly teachers are not exempt at all from those things that lots of us are feeling during this time when we're being asked to really change what we do and how we do it and in what ways we do it. And so there were some pretty significant adjustments to scheduling and different things that occurred. And for some people, they might be aware that there were some things in the executive order that came out a few weeks ago, probably 5 weeks ago now, that actually created some provisions for some additional time and ability to plan together and things like that. We had already done that. So we had already done that through some of our intentional design from back when we were looking at what are the instructional models and what might those needs be. And so, our teachers have some additional time on Fridays to be able to connect and work together. Our principals are working out in their buildings to for sure support and hear from and make adjustments to. And I won't say that it's all perfect or sunshiny and rosy all over the place right now, because that's just not the case for anybody in their lives right now. But certainly there's some intentionality around both how do we look at what is the time, what is the support, how do we free up some of the other things that we're doing and free up some of the time to be able to give teachers time to look at that. And then there have been lots of different supports for professional development and growth, because one of those challenges is, and one of the reasons it's tiring and burnout, is everybody's learning how to do things in new ways. And so, everyone's having to build new routines. And it's like anything, when you have to learn a new skill or a new way of doing things, the first 10 times you do it, it can be really challenging. And then you do it another 10 times and it gets a little easier, and you do it another 50 times, it becomes a little easier yet. And, as you go, you start to build those skill sets and that stamina to be able to be in that space. And so, we've done some of those things. We've also, I've referenced earlier, we spent some additional resources on staffing and supports for students, and that's inclusive of supports for staff as well, that have been working to try to lessen that. So, it's going to be all of us going through that in partnership in all kinds of different ways.
Well, I worry about our mental health, teachers, students, administrators, parents, everybody. I really worry about that. So I don't know if you're a betting man, Josh, but if
A
you
very good one. Oh,
had to put a wager on whether we would start the 2021-22 school year in a traditional fashion, would that be something that you would bet on or not?
I actually would right now. And I think it will be, a renormalized state. I spoke about that at the beginning, where, I think, and quite honestly, I think, there's probably a pretty decent likelihood that we might even finish this school year in, what might feel like a little bit more normalized state. And so, I'm really hopeful of that right now. I'm hopeful for the end of this school year. I think it would be so healthy, as you talk about that mental health side of things, we've all endured a lot. And, we've done that with a lot of care for people and a lot of compassion for people. And, I think it would be such a great thing if we can get to the end of this year and finish, in a way that really provides kind of some closure and those connections, increased connections and relationship. And I believe by the time we get to next fall, we really will be able to start school in a way that feels much more normal in all kinds of ways.
And do you have a particular point of view of where educators fall into that hierarchy of people receiving vaccines and when?
Yeah, so there certainly has been, this is stepping into the political realm, because that's where that discussion is occurring right now. And the governor and teams have started to lay out that plan for Minnesota. They certainly received guidance from the CDC around that as well. And so it's pretty clear, and as it should be, that our medical personnel, people who are taking care of people right now, from a health perspective, are going to be first in line. The CDC certainly put teachers in that essential worker group, and in a priority lineup. And I believe between our governor and then hearing from some of both the Republican and Democrat legislators, that I think that will be the case here in our state as well. And so, hopefully we'll see that here pretty early in the winter months here, as they're able to make sure that our healthcare workers are taken care of first, and some of our folks who are most at risk. And then, my hope would be, if we can get, teachers vaccinated, that we'll be in a spot where, we could reopen quite a bit more.
Sure. And so just to recap on what's next, we can anticipate a decision soon on what happens January 4th and beyond.
Yep, absolutely.
Next week.
You're gonna push me for a date. I'm meeting. I'm meeting with the teams this week and next week.
Okay.
And realistically, I want to make sure our staff and students and families have notice, really prior to us going into break, as to what it will be when we come back. Logistically and philosophically, I mean, if you go back to that framework that I've been operating from in terms of decision making and communication, I want to make sure people have a couple weeks to be able to make those adjustments. And so, I'll stay committed to that. And the only reason I wouldn't follow that is if there was some emergency where we had to respond more quickly. But otherwise, I'm really committed to doing this in a thoughtful and planful way. That's the way we went into distance learning, is to make sure that we gave notice for folks to be able to make those adjustments. And that would be my intention on how we would move back as well.
Understood. Yep. So I started this interview with a personal question, asking you about a couple of words that describe what this period has been like. I'm going to end with a personal question, just to ask what has helped get you through these many months of challenges and obstacles and adjustments and all of that.
Yeah. It's people, it's what's gotten us through this is phenomenal work and leadership from all kinds of people. When I think about the work our principals have done and our teachers have done and our bus drivers have done, our food service people have done, I mean, it is that collective effort and just true commitment to care for our kids and our families and our community. I have watched so many people across the organization just selflessly step up. I need to make sure to get that right. But they have stepped up with truly other people in their hearts and thinking about other people and just doing whatever it takes. And that means we step out of what our traditional roles are sometimes and what we might do. I had a chance last spring through our Noon Rotary group, which works with delivering books for kids. And I had a chance to ride along in a bus and hand deliver books to our first graders. And when we needed to pull that together, we asked, our transportation folks and other people to just volunteer and step in. Everyone was like, yep, hands on, let's go. When we needed food delivered out, there wasn't a second thought, from our staff to do that. When we pulled our teachers back in this summer to talk about what should our instructional delivery models look like, our teachers were some of the biggest advocates for, okay, we've got to get our kindergarten and first grade students back in full time. It's absolutely based on what we saw in the data and what it was looking like. That is what's right for our kids, and we need to figure this out. When we looked at the data and feedback from kids and families and what happened with instruction, there was a huge driver for, we gotta have a way to connect kids synchronously, if we're going to end up in some kind of hybrid model. And so, just watching, continuous focus on our kids and our families and, watching people set, their own interests off to the side for a minute to go, how am I going to care for other people? I think that's the thing that, organizationally has allowed us to thrive in all kinds of ways under really difficult circumstances. And, I get to talk with superintendents and leaders and school districts and other folks across the state. And I will tell you, I mean, like, our kids and our families are in great hands with our staff. And again, I know it's not perfect all the time. And I get this is a tough time for all kinds of people. But truly, that care for each other, the patience, it's grace, it's continuing to stay focused on how do we do this in partnership and do it together. That's going to get us through. It's going to get us back to that renormalized environment. And I truly think we're going to get there. So I think we're lucky to be here in Eden Prairie and have the community and families and staff that we do here in the school district.
Well, thank you very much for your time tonight, and it was very informative. Appreciate that. And continued good luck in the weeks and months ahead on this topic, and of course everything else related to education. Thanks once again for being part of this program.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate the invite and being willing to facilitate this tonight, and I appreciate the conversation. Thanks to those people who tuned in tonight and were able to listen and hear and ask questions as well. I appreciate everybody.
And I want to remind people that we're back with one of these events on January 7th when our guest is Jennifer Loon. Jennifer will be talking about the news startup in Eden Prairie called the Eden Prairie Local News, which is taking a nonprofit digital approach to filling the news void in Eden Prairie. And you can learn about these events, which we actually think will continue well into the spring, by going to Eventbrite and searching for EP by Zoom, and of course watching for the foundation's announcements on its website and elsewhere about upcoming events. The website will also tell you about our impact in Eden Prairie. So please check out epcommunityfoundation.org. Here's the detail about the next EP by Zoom. That'll be 7 p.m. Thursday, January 7th. And we also want to let you know that in addition to being involved in sponsoring the Eden Prairie local news until it gets its 501c3 status, we are very active with our COVID-19 response fund, spinning out quick response grants. That fund has raised $75,000 from generous donors throughout the community. So far, we have spun out about $45,000 in grants to nonprofits to provide basic needs like food to students and families. And we'll continue to spin out grants from that fund throughout the rest of the pandemic and recovery. So lots more information on the Community Foundation website. Thanks again for attending tonight, and have a great rest of the week. Goodbye, folks.
Good evening. Thank you.